Warning! This show contains material that some listeners may find troubling, including discussions of intense horror movie themes, explicit language, movie spoilers, and women speaking. Listener discretion is advised.
What's that sound?
Hello, horror fans. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Eleanor.
And welcome to Horror Sandbox, the podcast where we dig around in horror films and see what we can unearth.
That's right. Before we get started with today's movie, Charlie, how have you been coping with the horrors?
So, I tried so hard to finish this book before this recording, but I couldn't. But I do want to talk about the fact that I am almost done with the first dungeon crawler, Carl.
New achievement! Oh my gosh! Tell me how much you love it.
It's going to take over my entire life. It's going to become my personality. I'm obsessed.
I'm so excited for you.
I know, it's so good. I am already ready to run to the store and buy like all of the books in this series. And this is the first book I've read in a long time that I'm like reading the physical copy of the book, not the Kindle or listening to the audiobook. I know you prefer the audiobook, but I don't know. I like the physical copy and reading all the achievements. I love this book so much. It's so good. I love it.
It is good. I'm excited for this journey.
Yes, it's incredible. It's funny because my significant other kept like, I would smile or laugh or say something, and he's like, "Oh, what's happening in the book now?" And I would just say the most unhinged, like, "Yeah, the cat's battling a garbage monster that only speaks Spanish," and he's like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "It's so good, it's so good." But anyway.
I mean, you can say the sentence, Princess Donut wants Carl to lean into the AI's foot fetish to give them an advantage. And those are all words, but together they might be kind of jarring.
They're so jarring. The AI foot fetish is so hilarious. I'm obsessed with it. It's so good.
Yeah, it's really good. Between you, me, and my sister-in-law, we're forming our own little tiny cult. It's great.
It is. Maybe we should start like a online book club for everyone else reading Dungeon Crawler Carl. That'll be our side hustle to this podcast.
There is a cult, like, to be clear. There's absolutely a Dungeon Crawler Carl cult.
Oh yeah.
And I'm happy that you've joined it with us.
Me too. But okay, how have you been coping this week?
I had the first kind of just chill weekend in a long time, and I really needed it. It's been a really busy last few months, and our weekends have been packed, and I got to take naps. I got to read a bunch. I took my kids to the pool in the neighborhood. It was just great. Nothing thrilling, but it was fantastic. Oh, and I updated our Letterboxd account. I finally got caught up on that. So if listeners want to follow us there, we're there on Letterboxd. Just search Horror Sandbox and you should find us pretty quickly. It's still kind of new. We haven't done a ton with it, but come find us.
Yes, come find us. It's funny because for a second when you said letterboxed, it kind of sounded like you said litter box. They're very similar words.
That's my other account.
Come follow us on Litterbox. No. But yeah, if anyone has any suggestions or what they want to see from us on Letterboxd, I have no idea what we're doing there. But it's a cool little site and I'm excited to do more with it. So
yeah, I am too. I'm excited to interact with more fans on there, so that'd be cool. Okay, Charlie, with the coping out of the way, what are we digging into today?
we are digging into the 2020 movie Post Mortem. The IMDb summary for this movie is a post-mortem photographer and a little girl confront ghosts in a haunted village after the First World War. It's written by Piero Schake, Gabor Helbrandt, and Peter Burgundy, and it's directed by Peter Burgundy. It is starring Victor Clem, Frugina Hess, and Judith Schell. And we can't dig around in a horror sandbox without our trusty rusty tools, so Eleanor, what is your Bloody Shovel Award?
This movie has the best corpse dancing that I have ever seen. It is so much fun.
I will say the corpses are the best actors in this whole movie. Not to say the other actors are bad, but the corpses have some brilliant moments. It's really cool.
It's incredible. I think it is the thing that hooked me on this movie.
That's fair. That's a valid point.
But what about you? What is your Bloody Shovel Award?
My bloody shovel is this is the most frustrated I've ever been with an entire village of people, which you will hear me rant about throughout this whole episode.
That's entirely valid. And that even counts the time you threatened to burn down that one entire village.
Ooh, in our Dungeons and Dragons campaign, right?
Yes.
I've tried to burn down that specific village in, I think, 2 or 3 different campaigns in the same setting now because F that village. Anyway, the movie starts in 1918 and we get a quick World War I battle scene where various people are getting blown up and shot at, and it focuses on one man running through the chaos. And while he's running, he gets thrown sideways by a bomb. And then it cuts to him just laying on the ground looking up at the sky. And as he's laying on the ground, he sees a young woman hovering over him saying his name, Tomas.
Did you notice the bodies of the soldiers being thrown in the air by the blast? Because I think this comes back.
I did. And it's funny that you say that now because I now know exactly what you're talking about. But it's funny because in the opening scene, I was like, oh, the way the bodies are thrown is kind of cheesy. But you're so right. It absolutely comes back. I agree. After the battle, it cuts to men placing crosses and gathering corpses and wounded soldiers from the battlefield. And they begin to throw the bodies into a mass grave. Tomas is in this mass grave and a body is thrown on top of him. And when it hits him, he begins to breathe. As he's breathing, an older man notices him and pulls him out. And he examines him and sees like this strange mark on his side that looks like some kind of healed wound or bruise in the shape of a cross. And the old man says it must have been from a blast force.
Have you ever seen the movie 1917?
I have. It's a great movie. Fantastic movie.
It's a fantastic movie. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, it is set in World War I, and it technically is not done in one continuous shot, but it looks like it is. And there's some really amazing scenes throughout the entire movie, and it shows you a lot of the senseless brutality of war and the things about World War I that made that specifically a really awful and cruel war. And it has, I think, one of the best death scenes that I've ever seen because it is so senseless and sudden and really heartbreaking. And for anyone who has seen it, I'm referring to what happens after the plane carrying the enemy soldier crash lands and the fight that happens after that. So if you haven't seen the movie, definitely watch it. It's incredible.
Oh, yeah, you're so right. I forgot about that scene. I was sitting here, I was like, which one? Which one? But as soon as you said the plane crash landing, I was like, oh, yes, I remember. Yeah, it's a really good movie. I think I actually saw that one in theaters, and I don't see a lot of movies in theaters. It was a good one. So the movie then cuts to what appears to be an outdoor marketplace or some kind of like traveling circus or caravan. And it says it's a year and a half later in the future. There's a young girl walking through it and she comes across an older man on a small stage and he's telling people for a few coins they can come listen to his story about how he came back from the dead and what he saw on the other side. And upon farther inspection of these characters, we realize that the old man is the one who pulled Tomas out of the grave in the opening scene, and the girl looks just like the girl who appeared to him when he almost died.
I have a theory about who she really is and what's happening with their dynamic, which can come across as a little peculiar at times. I want us both to talk about it at the end because I really want to know your thoughts, but I don't want to dwell on it yet.
I'm excited to hear your theory because I do have a lot of theories about this movie, but I have no idea what's going on with the two of them. So I'm definitely excited to hear what you have to say. Anna walks up to a tent and she sees a poster board covered with post-mortem photos on it.
And so if you don't know what post-mortem photos are, it's literally photos that are taken of someone who has died. They're sometimes also called memorial photos. And just a quick note on the ones that they show us here, some of these images are of real famous post-mortem pictures. So they're reproductions of real photos of dead people that were taken during the Victorian era. And then some of them are just recreations of very misunderstood photos that do not depict any dead person. Or at least they weren't dead when the photo was taken.
That's cool. I have seen a lot of like articles on these photos, and I've seen some of the photos and some of the ones that were mistaken for postmortem photos, and they're very unsettling, but for the time they make a lot of sense. I assume we'll talk about it more at the end.
Yes, we definitely will.
Inside the tent, Tomas is getting ready to take a photo for a family whose daughter has died, and the father says the whole village next door had been wiped out by the Spanish flu, but in his village, only he and his daughter got sick. And Tomas makes a comment and says there's worse ways to die, and the dad gets super upset, and he's saying, "Are you saying I'm lucky I didn't die, but she did?" And it's like a weird moment.
Yeah, it was super awkward, and this sort of thing must have happened a lot back then. Like, people are just dying all over the place, and at a certain point, you kind of run out of things to say, especially if you are someone who is working with the dead quite a bit.
Yeah, especially with Tomas, because he's around them all the time. He's probably seen some pretty gruesome ones. But yeah, so it was just a comment he should not have made to a grieving father. Anna goes inside the tent and she sees the old man telling the story about when he died. He says he was lightweight and not breathing, and he saw the loveliest woman he had ever seen, and she lifted his soul. Someone asked if he was there alone, and he says, "How could he be alone when there are more dead than living and the world is overrun by death?"
The feeling of the world being overrun by death after World War I and the 1918 pandemic had to be really palpable for almost everyone on the entire planet.
I'm sure. Especially the Spanish flu. Wasn't that the one that took out like predominantly young men and was super widespread?
It did impact healthy, quote unquote healthy, quote unquote young people more so than it seemed like something like that should have.
Right, yeah, where traditionally flus target, more immune compromised, like elderly or young. So it was different. It was very impactful.
I'll dig into this a little bit more at the end too, so we can talk about the pandemic.
So the old man is on the one side of the tent, and then on the other side of the tent, Tomas takes the picture of the family, and they stand up to leave, and we get this weird corpse moment where the dead girl's neck falls sideways really dramatically. Tomas goes into his dark room to develop the photo, and he runs into Anna there and asks what she's doing. And she asks him if he takes pictures of the dead, and he's like, well, obviously. And she says that they have a lot of dead in her village and asks him to come. She also asks if he can take pictures of the ghosts there too, and he says you can't photograph ghosts. And right when he says that, this like dark figure rushes past across the screen, and it appears to leave the tent and move the flap of the tent. Just Anna notices it, and she says she has to go, and they're waiting for her. And as she goes to leave, Tomas gets a clear view of Anna's face and realizes that it's the girl he saw when he died. While this is happening, the old man ends his story by saying the girl grabbed his hand and yanked him out of the chasm when he died. Tomas gives the picture he took to the family with the deceased daughter, and then he leaves the tent to go find Anna. While he's out, two men notice his poster board with the photos and say it would be nice if they could get photos for the dead in their town. As they're saying this, Tomas stumbles on them, and they're with the girl, Anna, and he asks if he can help them. Then it cuts to a scene where Tomas is talking to the old man, and the old man's questioning how many dead the village really could have. And Tomas says he's not going to the village for the dead. He's actually going there because the girl that he saw was the girl that brought him back to life. And he says he'll be gone for a few days, and he'll catch up with a caravan in about a week.
And the old man is just totally taking this in stride. He's like, yeah, of course. Of course, just go follow this random kid to a village full of dead people because you saw her in a vision. Why not? I mean, the world's falling apart. This isn't weirder than any of that.
It's true. He's just like, okay, whatever, go do your thing. I'll see you in a week. So Tomas takes a wagon back to the village, and one of the men from the village mentions that they haven't buried their dead for weeks because it's too cold. He also mentions how one of the widows talks nonsense about how her husband died and says he was in bad health anyways. And when they arrive at the village, it's very quiet, and there's like a lot of these people wearing these burlap bags over their heads with like eye holes and mouth holes in them. And they also ride past a barn with dead bodies laying in it and a small church.
These bags that are over their heads, they come up a little bit later too. And I think I know what is being referenced here. So when that comes up again, I'll mention it.
I'm excited. These bags are perplexing for sure. Tomas gets out of the wagon and everyone kind of just leaves him on the side of the road. And Anna runs over to her house, and her auntie is there in a wheelchair and she takes her inside. And there's like the people in the masks are just staring down Tomas from a window, and he hears like a man yelling in the distance. And he's just standing there and he sets his camera down on the ground and it starts to sink into the mud pretty dramatically.
Yeah, like it's being swallowed up by soggy earth. If you remember when he was being thrown into the trench, the walls of the trench were also very muddy and water was kind of pouring out of them. And so I think this is a nod to the trench warfare that Tomas had endured and to his PTSD. And I'll get into that a little bit more later.
Yeah, I definitely see that. It also is similar to how the house sinks into the ground at the end, but we'll get there when we get there. As Tomas is standing there, Joska, the man that hired Tomas to come to the village, brings Tomas to Marcia's place, which I think her home is also an inn. And he asks Marcia if Tomas can stay there. And she says he can stay there for just a few days and gives him a room. And she asks if he's hungry and makes him a meal. And she gives him like this gigantic slice of bread and 2 onions and some cheese. And I think this meal is supposed to look like plain and awful, but honestly, I'd enjoy it. Like, it's basically what I eat for lunch every day while I desperately shove random things into my mouth while I chase the girls around. In fact, today for lunch, all I had was 2 cheese sticks. I didn't even get the bread part of it.
Girl dinner.
Ugh, girl dinner, the best dinner. So Tomas goes outside for a smoke and he sees this dog out there and it's barking and jumping around at something. And if you look closely at the dog, it looks like it's jumping onto someone or like someone is picking it up and kind of moving it around and there's something invisible there.
Yeah, it's a really weird shot because at first glance, it just looks like a dog is playing, but then you kind of notice something isn't quite right with it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's the first idea that the ghost can actually interact with things in the world. So as Tomas is outside, he sees Anna walking by and asks if he can join her. And she says, only if you're not afraid of the dead. So he continues to walk with her. And while they're walking, Anna mentions that her mom and dad are dead and she lives with her auntie now. And Tomas asks how old she is and she says she's 10. They walk to this graveyard in the woods and Anna starts to list off all the people who are there. And Tomas just sits on the ground and smokes. And then Anna jumps out from behind a tree and scares him. And then they chat for a little bit and head back to town.
What do you think this scene is establishing? Like, why is this here?
I think it's kind of showing that Anna's a bit of a loner and she just hangs out with the dead and not anyone else in town, whether that's by choice or because there isn't anyone else. I'm not sure, but I think it's just like these are the people who she hangs out with, the dead folks.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I also think it's kind of showing, like, demonstrating that she is just a little bit off because of how much death has been in her life from a very early time. And she's also kind of proving to Thomas that she isn't afraid of his post-mortem photography. So, because she's definitely interested in helping him. So I think she's trying to show that she can handle that business.
Oh, that's true. That, like, she's not afraid of his photos and wants to kind of test him and see if she can be around. So it cuts to nighttime and Tomas is in bed in the inn. And while he's trying to fall asleep, he hears voices and noises. So he gets up and he closes his window. But when he closes it, his door to his room opens up and he calls for Marcia, but there's no answer. So he shuts the door and tries to go back to bed. But when he lays down, he hears this like muffled yelling somewhere in the house.
The yelling here is really freaky. Like, it's super distorted, and then it kind of sounds like it comes from one side of the house and runs to the other. And at a certain point, it sounds like the walls literally swallow it, and you can still hear it, but it's kind of muffled. It's really disturbing.
A lot of the noises, the creepy noises in this movie are really well done. And it almost sounds like someone's kind of screaming into a pillow in this one, but there's definitely some moaning and groaning and screams later that really get under my skin. Tomas grabs a lantern and he goes into the hallway to investigate. And as he's looking at this portrait of a man on the wall, he hears a shriek that seems to like run past him and it brushes his shirt as it runs away into the door behind him. And it's kind of this moment where you can't really tell, is it the wind or is it a ghost? Like, what's happening? And he opens the door to the room that the ghost seemingly goes into and he goes inside and it opens up into a hallway. And it's this thin hallway with a ladder at the end of it that goes up into an attic. And he goes towards it. And as he's walking towards it, he does peer into Marcia's room and sees that she's in there sleeping. And all of a sudden, he hears these footsteps just sprinting upstairs and a weird moaning noise. And he goes up to the attic and he peeks his head up. And while he's looking around, his lantern suddenly gets snuffed out by some wind. And he immediately ducks downstairs and he relights it. And then he goes back up, but this time he goes all the way up. And he's standing up there and he asks if there's anyone there and he looks around. There's nothing there. And then he looks back down onto the floor and the ladder has fallen to the side. So he kind of jumps out of the attic. And right after he jumps out of the attic, the door violently slams shut behind him.
This is just like with Ellison in Sinister, right? Like this whole scene, I was so waiting for ghost kids to throw some home movies at him.
I know. I was like, oh gosh, he's going to turn around and there's going to be a bunch of ghost kids sitting there. It was just like Sinister, exactly like it. Tomas goes back to his room and he locks it with the classic chair under the door handle method and tries to fall back asleep. And somehow he does manage to fall back asleep. And as an audience, we see this strange shadow creature kind of violently come out of the floor and hover over Tomas and stare at him.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a jump scare, right? I love this. The ghost is like leering at him and it's really creepy. And I think the fact that that Tomas doesn't react at all makes this a lot more unsettling because your instinct is to be like, look out. But he's just completely oblivious.
I will definitely say, like, it was a jump scare that got me. I wasn't expecting it yet because they reveal the ghosts very early. I did find the shadow people ghost design to be just a touch cheesy, but the idea of some dark figure hovering over my bed while I sleep at night is probably one of the scariest, most unsettling things ever. So, yes, it's well done.
Yeah, and like some of them do look kind of cheesy, and yet this is somehow really creepy and it sucks you in. I don't know. What this movie does with what it has is pretty cool.
I agree with that. I think what, for me, it lacks in the visual effects with the ghosts is, like I said, the moans are really well done, and the way they move is really well done, too. That gets me sometimes.
Yeah, right? They scurry. We love a good scurry movie around here, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes, it's a great scary movie. The next morning, Tomas wakes up and he goes down to eat more bread and cheese with Marcia. And he says he heard a noise in the night. And she just asks him if he's afraid of the dark. And he says only if there's something scary.
I think she's totally flirting with him here. But also him being like, only if there's something scary. He definitely sounds like a war veteran with PTSD.
Oh my gosh. How did I not? I missed that nuance. I missed that she was flirting here, but you're 1,000% correct.
Are you afraid of the dark, Tomas?
That's what, see, that was lost in the dubbing for me. But you're 1,000% correct. That is what happened. It cuts to Tomas visiting a house with Imre. He's the other man who went to town to get Tomas. And Imre says that the house belonged to his now deceased sister, but he's giving it to Tomas to take his photos. And as they walk in the dining room area, we see another one of those shadow figures walk with them. They chat, and Imre mentions that Marcia is a school teacher, but there's no kids anymore. And Tomas is like, well, what about Anna? And Imre, I guess Anna doesn't have to go to school because Imre says Anna has no parents. They died and she just takes care of her auntie who had a stroke, which that bothered me because that doesn't really answer the question. Like, okay, her parents are dead, but we're not going to teach her anything. Whatever.
Yeah, he's just like, kids don't count if your parents are dead. That's strange.
It's very strange.
I think what they're really trying to say here is, listen, we have much bigger problems right now. Half of the world just died, and some of them are still continuing to die, and she's trying to take care of her very ill aunt. So school is not really a thing for her right now.
That's true. She's probably learning much more in life experiences than school could ever teach her. Imre gives Tomas the keys to the house, and he leaves. Tomas begins to set up his photo studio area, and as he does, this random cabinet in the back opens, but before he notices, two men come in with a dead body, and Tomas asks if it's his sister, but they say no. They actually say that they brought her in last night and point to another body in the other corner of the room that Tomas never noticed.
He has gotten so used to death that he literally doesn't see bodies unless they're like specifically pointed out to him. It's like when my husband can't find anything in the house unless I put it in front of his face.
Man vision.
Yes.
Man vision. I call it husband vision or man vision.
But also, if this place that they're allowing him to use is basically a body storage unit, why did they offer to let him like Airbnb there? It's air, bed, and bodies.
Better or worse than the Philly Verbo?
Probably better. This one looks more ventilated.
That's true. It does look somehow even cleaner. Tomas then removes the sheet from Emery's sister when Emery suddenly comes back into the house, and then he asks Tomas to see the pictures, and Tomas shows him some. After that, Tomas starts to get the other dead body, who is a kind of young man, ready for his picture.
He's in this scene, he's using these kind of posing racks to like sort of brace the body in place. Think of it like an easel, but for a person. And this, for everyone who's screaming right now who already knows this is not accurate at all. You'll also hear in these scenes, you can hear him kind of cracking the joints. He's not really breaking bones, but he's kind of forcibly posing the bodies because rigor mortis has already set in. And of course, they've been stored outside where it's freezing. So he's trying to pose them from that frozen condition. And again, that is simply not how any of this was really done. But I will go into a little more detail later.
Oh, I'm excited because I just assumed that this is how it was done. So, ooh, I want to know how it really is. There's this really tense moment when Tomas is looking directly into this corpse's eyes. And as he does this, we see the corpse's hand move just a tiny bit, but then nothing else happens. And Tomas is able to get the body set up and takes a picture.
Every single scene with the corpses in this is so intense. And these, I believe every single one of them is an actor. Like it's a person. They're not using, props or whatever. But even when they are literally doing nothing, I don't know what it is about this, but I really like it. I know that I was this way with Caveat as well. There is something about this that bothers me in a good way, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, I agree completely. Everybody in this movie really freaked me out, and I did wonder if they were real actors or not. And yeah, it's crazy. I think what for me personally it is that every time I see these bodies, I am bracing for a jump scare to happen at any second. But the bodies are so present so often that you know that like the jump scare can't be coming every second. So you're not sure when to brace for it and when not to brace for it, and if it's gonna hit you and or if it's not gonna happen at all.
Yeah, it keeps you tense and it keeps you guessing, so maybe that's what I'm responding to, but it's really good. I like it.
Yeah, I liked it too. Tomasin takes a picture of a dead woman with her husband, and then next up is a man his neck looks so strange. It looks like it's been stretched completely around multiple times and then unwrapped like a towel almost, and it's really strange.
Yeah, if you could imagine taking a lump of silly putty and then, like, stretching it until you get that kind of, like, weird ropey thing in the middle, that's what his neck looks like, and it is really strange, and I'll fully admit I simply don't know what this means, except that it's really freaky, and I think that might be the entire point of it.
Oh, I have a theory on what this one means actually, but I'll save it for later.
Thank goodness one of us does, because I was lost.
Yeah, this is one of the few things I have a theory for. Tomas gets the weird neck guy ready to take a picture with his wife, and after he takes a picture, she thanks Tomas and says she never expected to see her husband looking normal again, and says she's going to put the picture in a lovely frame. And then there's a montage of him taking more pictures. Next up is a family with a deceased little boy, and Tomas puts the boy in the mother's lap, and then it's Emery's sister, and then when he's getting her ready, Anna knocks on the door. Tomas lets Anna in, and Anna then tells Tomas a story about how when she was born, she was dead because her umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck, but Auntie brought her back to life. And Tomas asks if she remembers it, and Anna says not in the way that the old man described at the fair. And as she's talking to Tomas, the absolute creepiest moment of this entire movie happens, and the dead body that's laying on the floor behind them in the background just kind of sits up in this really jagged, weird motion where it like sits up halfway like it's doing a crunch and then moves its arms really strange. It's very unsettling. It creeped me out.
This was the scene that hooked me in. I was like, whatever happens next, I love this movie already. The movement is so unnatural because her back stays completely flat and she like almost lifts up with just her back, like that thing you see vampires do in like really old vampire movies where they just suddenly kind of stand up without bending any part of them.
Yeah, I think the vampire thing is like a perfect, like just a vampire coming out of a coffin where their bottom stays still and the top comes up. But yeah, I that's a good way to describe it for sure.
And as she's lifting like this, her arms are kind of like bending and jerking back and forth, and it happens really, really fast. And then she, as soon as it happens, she's down again. And I wish I could have been in the room with you when you saw this for the first time.
This was a scene that I texted you and I was like, well, I was taking notes and now I'm not because I was like, okay, I'm tuned in now. I'm here.
Yeah, it gets you.
Yeah, it got me for sure. And then the scenes immediately after this got me too. This whole movie's wild. Anna and Tomas both hear the body and they ask each other what it was, but then they kind of ignore it. And Anna asks if she can look at Tomas's pictures, but then suddenly they hear a ghost snarl and the fire in the corner by the dead body seems to grow bigger. And Anna says she has to go and she leaves. Tomas also steps outside and he watches Anna talk to a little boy named Lassica. She asks him to take off like the sack that he's wearing over his head and asks if he's scared of her. And he says no, he's only scared of ghosts and takes it off. They joke about Lassica's pregnant goat that he's walking, and then Lassica's mom angrily comes out of nowhere and puts a bag back over his head and pulls him away.
Okay, so I promised a really quick thing about these masks. There is an annual festival in Hungary where there's a parade of people marching in these really ornate and kind of terrifying masks, many of which are carved from wood and feature like horns and just like a general creepy vibe. This tradition comes from a story about the Ottoman occupation that happened in the 16th century. Supposedly, everyone fled town to get away from the invaders, and then one night they were approached by this mysterious figure who told them to get ready for battle and make some really scary masks and make sure they all had weapons. And a masked knight would come and lead them into battle. So they did exactly that, and the masked knight showed up. And they marched back to their own town, making really horrible noises and just looking like something straight out of the nightmares of their enemies. The invaders all fled and they never came back. And so now this tradition carries on as part of an annual festival. And at this festival, you can find people in homemade masks, in addition to the big, scary carved wooden ones. You can find people wearing ski masks and other homemade things. And then some of them are literally made from potato sacks, and they look an awful lot like what this kid is wearing. And I did bring you a picture.
It looks just like what this kid's wearing. I think that's probably exactly what inspired these masks. It's mostly the young boys that are wearing them, and it's to protect them from, I assume, the spirits or the ghosts. So they're trying to scare them off by being scary. So that's cool.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's what
Yeah.
they're nodding out at too here. They don't really go into it at any point in the movie, but I think that's what this is kind of alluding to.
I agree. Whether it is or is not, it now is. So, canon. Anna leaves the house that Tomas is in and she runs into her house upset. And Tomas follows behind and goes to the side of the house and looks into a window. While he's watching, Anna is feeding her auntie and she's playing with these two dolls. And she seems to be holding like one kind of low on its back and the other one floating above it in a circular motion. And did you notice that this is exactly how the movie ends?
It is, but it is also how the old man was describing to that crowd that he had his near-death experience.
Oh, yeah, you're right with the floating. So maybe she was telling her auntie the story with the dolls.
Could be.
So while Tomas is watching, Auntie quickly turns her head towards the window and she sees him. And Auntie is so creepy, but we'll talk about her more later. Tomas goes back to his dark room and he starts developing the photos that he took that day. And it then cuts to him sitting at the desk looking at the pictures he's taken. And there's shadow people in every single one of them. And they are not subtle at all. They are very obviously there. He then takes a few more pictures of the sister body in the room that he's in. And then he goes behind her to see if he can kind of touch the air to see if he feels anything there where the shadow people normally are in the photos.
Yeah, he's like trying to grope the ghosts. And I love this because it's like early 20th century version of those ghost hunting TV shows, like where they're looking for the orbs or the funny lights. But he's doing it with practically the very first camera there ever was.
The original ghost hunter. You're so right. I bet like this kind of camera would capture ghosts better than any digital camera we have nowadays too.
He just needs like an obnoxious graphic tee and entirely too much hair gel, and he totally fit the vibe.
You're so right. So as Tomas is doing this, we start to hear screaming outside, and it just seems like the entire town starts running towards something. So Tomas goes outside to check it out. And as he steps outside, it zooms in on the sister's face, and she has a single tear running down her face.
And just yet more amazing acting from these lovely corpses.
They really are great. And Tomas follows the town folk, and they appear to be running with buckets of water towards a burning or at least very heavily smoking building. They break the door down into the building, and people are screaming. It's chaos, and they're yelling for a woman named Clary. And when they get inside, there's all this furniture stacked up in front of the chimney. They start to rip it all down, and they rip away the last piece, and you see these legs hanging from the chimney with smoke coming out of it, and everyone just starts screaming and sobbing and trying to rip her out of the chimney, but they can't. And while all this is happening, Ross is taking pictures of what's going on. All of a sudden, this other man starts to take an axe to the chimney to get Clary out, and he rips this chunk of stone away right where her face is. And we see this very much dead face where it's like super distorted. Her one eye is way bigger than the other. One's kind of like smoky and clouded, and her face is kind of frozen in this screaming way. And then water begins to leak down the walls, and she violently slides out of the chimney, and everyone screams and runs away.
This escalation is just insane.
I know. We go from these like creepy hauntings to there's a dead woman in a chimney. Like, it's wild.
Yeah, it's like, maybe that dog is playing with a ghost and not a fly we can't see. And, ooh, this is kind of weird with the photos. And did that body just move to, we've killed your relative and it was bad?
Yes, like full on. And it's funny too, because you don't often get ghosts that just straight up murder folks. But this movie, they certainly do. It cuts away from this incredibly hectic scene, and it's just Tomas developing his photos from the chimney woman in his dark room, and each picture has various shadow people throughout them. After he develops the photos, Anna comes back into the house, and she asks if the ghosts are there, and she says that they did it. Tomasin randomly just screams out into the house, "What do you want here?" seemingly to the shadow figures that they can't see at the moment. But the shadow figures are there because they start to violently like shake the whole house, and they're throwing things off of tables and off the walls, and everything's kind of chaotic. Anna's freaked out, and she runs out of the house, and Tomas follows her and gives her a hug and tells her that it's okay. And this is one of the first moments I get a little frustrated because, like, honestly though, is it okay? Like, there's shadow ghost people shoving people in chimneys and breaking shit in the house. Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, it's okay. I would be running out of town with Anna.
Yeah, he's leaning way too much into the I was already dead and I'm back, so basically nothing phases me kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's far too much. Like, you should be freaked out in this moment. It's not normal that you're not freaked out. Anyway, he does try to calm Anna down, and he tells Anna he'll take her away from the town with him. And she says the ghosts are everywhere, and he shouldn't have come to the town because he made them angry, and it's all his fault. And he asks why it would be his fault, and she says she doesn't know, but they've never hurt anyone before. And she tells him to go away. And he says, all right, but I'm taking you with me. And she just screams at him to go away, and she runs away from him. It then cuts back to Marcia's, and Tomas is there showing her the photos he took. He says that these spirits are everywhere and gets frustrated when Marcia won't really speak. When she finally does, she says, what should I say? In this moment, Tomas realizes that Marcia definitely knows something and asks how long this has been going on and what does she know. Marcia goes on this kind of tangent rant about how all the men in the village got sent off to war, and then the rest died because of the Spanish flu. And she says there's nothing left to fear or worry about because there's nothing left for them here. And Tomas is like, okay, you're all crazy. I'm leaving tomorrow. And she says, good, you're just making things worse instead of helping anyway. And I am just so confused. Like, why is this entire town mad at this dude that they brought out here? Like, he didn't ask for this. He just photographs dead bodies. What kind of qualifications do they think he could possibly have to solve this issue? Like, you need an entire district of priests for this one, not just one photographer from a war.
Yeah. I will say, and this goes for the entire film, I think we lose some subtleties in the fact that it's a different country, it's a different culture, it's in a different period, and you and I are watching the dubbed English copy, which means they had to make dialogue changes to the script to make it more closely aligned with what the actors look like they're saying, rather than like a true translation or a true to the original translation script. And when I tell you a little bit more about the history of the horror genre in Hungary, I think some of this might actually make a little bit more sense.
Okay, that's good. I mean, I definitely caught that there were some times that I wasn't picking up on some subtleties, or what the actor said was definitely written a different way in the original than the dubbed version made it come across. But there's still moments where I'm just like, what are you people doing?
Oh, yeah. I'm not going to pretend that explains every weird thing about this movie. Yeah, I do think it's part of it.
Oh, for sure. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it. It cuts to nighttime, and Tomas is obviously failing to fall asleep because life is wild. And as he's just kind of tossing and turning in bed, he's suddenly lifted off the bed by an invisible force and then spun. I think he's laying on his stomach, and they spin him onto his back and then lay him back down. And of course, this freaks him out. So he rushes outside and immediately gets on his horse to leave, which good. He tries to go through this one gate, but the horse won't go through it for some reason. So he turns the horse around and just leaves town the other way. And as I'm saying this, I wonder if he was trying to go get Anna, but the horse, like the spirits weren't letting him go to Anna's house.
When I saw this scene, I thought he was trying to see if Anna would hear him and wake up. So I thought he was hesitating. I didn't read it as he couldn't go through the gate because the horse wouldn't let him. I thought he was delaying slightly because he was hoping Anna would come say goodbye or take him up on his offer to get her out of the weird town. But now that you say that, I could definitely see that interpretation as well.
Yeah, I think what I am coming to right now is it's a little bit of both. He wants to go get Anna, but the horse won't let him get to the house, and he's like freaked out. So he just turns around and leaves. And then Anna does see him leaving, and she rushes out of the house and yells for him, but he doesn't hear her at this point. It cuts to Tomas, and he's on the side of a lake with his horse, and he's sitting by a fire. And while he's sitting there, he hears Anna whisper his name and sees her walking towards him with her arms outstretched, and it's kind of creepy. And then all of a sudden she's in the air and she's kind of shaking and she's folding into all these different positions. And to be clear, she's doing this while she's floating in the air, and it's definitely incredibly unnatural and weird looking. And then all of a sudden she's hanging upside down and she screams, and it must have been a dream because then Tomas wakes up and he's alone in the camp. The next morning it's back in town, and Anna's sitting with Marcia crying, holding a doll, and then Tomas comes back in the door and they both seem like super happy and excited to see him, and he says he'll solve everything. And I'm just so confused. Like, they were just yelling at this man and telling him to leave because he was making it worse, and then they're like thrilled to see him walk back through the door. Just what is happening? I don't get it.
And again, I think here we lose some of the things in translation, but I also think people do and feel stupid and contradictory shit when they're afraid. And I don't know if you've ever had someone in your life that you're like so frustrated with them and you want them to leave, and then they do, and then you realize that wasn't really what you wanted. Maybe that's kind of what's happening here, because the world's been turned upside down, so they don't know how to feel or think or anything.
That's true. It's like that, you caused this mess, get away from me, and then they leave and everyone calms down and they get a night's rest, and then you're like, oh shoot, I definitely overreacted in that situation, and now they're gone. Whoops. So that's a relatable feeling, and probably what's happening here.
We've all been there. Cast out the handsome World War I survivor and then wished him back immediately.
It's so true. So now that Tomas is back, him and Anna go and they start to speak with several of the villagers in their homes, and they each share stories about their encounters with these spirits. And they all say that they all started early in the winter. And they recount various haunting stories, and they all seem kind of similar to what Tomas experienced on his first night in town. They're walking to the next house, and they walk past the burnt house where Clary's body was, and they look up at this ladder that's leading up into the roof. And for whatever reason, they decide to climb up it and investigate it. And as they get up there, they notice that the floor up here is incredibly dusty, and there's not a single footprint on the floor. And they look up at the chimney, and there's this big hole, about a body-sized hole in the chimney with blood splatter on the side of it. And they can hear a woman whimpering inside the chimney. And Tomas investigates the blood, and while he's looking at it, the entire house starts to shake. So they run out of it.
What did you think was happening here? Is this just showing that the spirits had dragged Clary that far up? Or because where they pull her out of the fireplace is on the first floor, and this is up in the attic. So was this showing the spirits actually managed to pull her much further up, and we're going to try to drag her into the attic? Or, was the blood just kind of showing us that the spirits had blood on their hands?
Oh, so what I got out of this was that the spirits dragged Clary up into the attic, slammed her body into the top portion of the chimney until it created a hole, and she was probably dead at this point, and then put her down it, where she was stuck when the villagers found her.
I was going to say, but then where are her footprints? But if they're just pulling her up, like, supernaturally, they could have made her float. And we do kind of see them do something like that later. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same way as they do to the little boy later in the movie. So I think they just moved her through the air, slammed her against the chimney, and then put her down it. And that's her blood from being slammed against a chimney violently enough to break it open.
Here comes Santa Claus.
Wait, you just creeped me out so bad. Oh, man, that was good. But yes, I did. It's funny because when I saw her feet in the chimney, I was like, oh, Santa. Not the Santa we want. Tomas and Anna then get to the next house, and it's the house of a woman named Emmy. And she says before the war, she was a servant at a judge's house in the city, and the judge's wife believed in ghosts and spirits, and she used to summon them. But the maids all laughed at her and just kind of brushed her off because they didn't believe in it. But then the judge got sick one day, and the woman summoned the spirits and asked them not to take her husband, and he did somehow manage to live, even though he was like on death's door. But after that, the ghosts remained. And they did various things, like they pushed a maid down the stairs and just haunted the house. And they tried to get rid of them with all different ways, including priests. But the only way the ghosts went away was that they disappeared after the judge died. So she thinks somehow the ghosts showed up because the judge tricked death or whatever. She then goes on to say that she's been hearing these ghosts whisper and moan for many months now, and they're definitely not human sounds. And then says that they should go visit Jutka. So they go over to Jutka's house, and this is the widow of the man whose neck looks like it was super twisted up, and she tells the story of her husband's death. She says he was in the chair in the kitchen, and she was down in the cellar, and she heard this like whistling sound, and then she watched as his head sank into his body, and she stood in the doorway of the cellar not knowing what to do, and he died, and she said everything was wet and water ran down the walls. And it's just like, I'm sorry, but if you witness a man's head literally get shoved into his body by evil spirits, why are you still living in that house? Like, what is this village doing?
Well, they didn't shove her head into her body, I guess.
But like they could. Obviously they don't care, and they're so freaky. I don't know. I hate this town.
And I do apologize. I did not research the real estate realities of early 20th century Hungary. That was not part of my research. I apologize.
That's fair. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter. Like, take your goats, take your cow, get on a wagon, like pack up your bread and go live in a field, because at least your head's not getting shoved into your torso there.
Get your cow, get your girl dinner, and get out of town.
Get out of town. Oh, man. So Tomas asks if he could look around, and she says yes. And Tomas and Anna go down into the cellar, and they ask out if anyone's there, and nothing really happens. They do hear an object move, but they don't see anything. So they start to head back upstairs. And as they head back upstairs, this strange shadow figure appears out of nowhere, crawling on all fours, following them up the stairs.
Yeah, it looks like it like melts out of the wood pile. It's so creepy.
It is creepy. And this one with the crawling, the way it crawls kind of gets me. So once Tomas gets upstairs, the door to the basement slams shut. And Anna is still stuck down there. And Tomas goes and he tries to open it, but he's pulled back by the ghosts, and he's sat in the chair. And Anna kind of backs up against the wall in the cellar, and she starts to yell Tibor while the shadow figure crawls up the stairs towards her. Tomas calls for Jutka, and Anna is picked up off the floor and shaken. And while all this is happening, there's a photo of Tibor, who's the husband with the bent neck, on the table, and that photo begins to scream. It then cuts back and forth to a flashback of Junko watching Tibor being murdered by the ghosts, and she's in the exact same spot where Anna is, and Tomas is in the exact same spot where Tibor was being held. And so it's kind of like a reenactment of how Tibor died. And we watch Tibor's head get pushed into his body, and then the spirits release Anna and Tomas.
The head thing is so weird, and it doesn't make immediate sense in the film, but I also think he had maybe some sort of a connection to the dead, and so maybe they have been trying to speak to him, and he just hasn't been listening. I'm not sure, but it's definitely creepy, and the way all of this just suddenly stops is also like, it's jarring how quickly it stops.
Yeah, it definitely is, because you kind of think like, okay, someone might die here. But what I put together from this scene, one of the village men mentioned that Tibor wasn't in good health and that Junka was keeping him alive. And so I wonder if he was one of those ones that was like kind of escaping death too, and the spirits were mad at him for that. And the other thing I mentioned, that I have a theory as to why he died the way he did and why his neck is all twisted like that. And I'll talk about this more at the end. But I think the ghosts are murdering people in the same way that people in the town were supposed to die. And I think Tibor specifically is reference to how Anna was supposed to die, with her umbilical cord being tied around her neck, because umbilical cords are kind of like twisted like that, and then it also being twisted around her neck. So I think Tibor's death is related to how Anna was supposed to die.
Okay, yeah. I could definitely see that. They're like, we've been trying to reach you about your death's extended warranty, and nobody's listening, so they're just like, we're going to find a way to get through to you.
Yeah, like you guys didn't pay up in your, like they almost like they have a tax of how many dead they're supposed to have a year, and they're not meeting the tax requirements. So they're just going to start taking people, and they're going to take them in the way that people were supposed to die. But I'll talk about my theory a little bit more at the end, but that's what I think is happening here. Anna and Tomas run out of the house, and Junka asks if everything's all right. Tomas asks where she keeps her husband's body, and she says it's in the barn. So him and Anna go and open up the barn, and there's like roughly a dozen bodies on the floor in there. Tomas asks who they are, and Anna says they're people from here and starts listing them off, and she's like, this one's a baker and his daughter and his wife and so on. Tomas asks if she knows why they all died, and she says most of them died of the Spanish flu. Tomas begins to investigate the bodies, and as he's examining the first one, he says that they died from suffocation. And Anna asks how he knows that, and Tomas says he's just learned it from working with the old man and arranging bodies. And Anna asks if he can teach her, and he says no because she's way too young.
And yet, he lets her keep joining him on all his little corpse adventures.
Yes, he's definitely allowing her to learn whether he likes it or not. So he starts taking a picture of this dead priest, and he asks if they have a new priest yet. And Anna says no, but everyone still goes to the church every Sunday. And Tomas sees another body, and Anna tells him that one froze to death, but nobody knows how. And he takes a few pictures of Anna before checking on Tibor's body. And he opens up Tibor's shirt, and he sees a mark on his chest, and it's very similar to the one that he had on his back during the war. And he looks at another body and he sees a similar mark on that one, but a little bit bigger. And he says that it's got to be a source of trauma with bruising on the chest despite the rigor mortis. Anna asks if everyone has one of these marks, and Tomas says no, only these two and Clary have one.
And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. Like, these corpses are marked, and they're marked like he was marked. So the ghosts have been trying to speak to them, and the ones that are dead are the ones that haven't been listening.
That's true. That, and I do just think, so 3 of them were murdered with some sort of force trauma, the way that Tomas was supposed to die. One of them froze to death somehow, which could be, we learned that one of the boys was supposed to die under the ice, so that could be the ice one. And then one was suffocated, which was how Anna was supposed to die. So I really think they're dying the way that these people who escaped death were supposed to die. Anna asks what causes these marks, and Tomas says that he had one too because of the blast force at the war that hit him. And Tomas then puts it together that these ghosts can make the air move and that it creates a blast force. And Tomas says that they need to find out what they want, and Anna mentions that, well, they're ghosts, they don't speak. And he says that it seemed like they were trying to speak to them, which is why they were pushing them and shoving them, but they didn't kill them. And then he says that they'll try to record them with photographs and try to hear their voices.
Ghost Hunter International Adventures, Victorian Edition.
A show I would probably watch. They go back to Tomas's black room and they develop more photos. And he says it seems like the dead are attracting the ghosts because every time he takes a picture of the dead, there's a bunch of spirits in the background. They develop the pictures with Anna and she's completely surrounded by ghosts. When they look at the photo, it seems to scream and then the light in the black room turns off and Anna starts to scream, but the door opens. It then cuts to them in the barn and Tomas and Anna start to set up like cameras and then they're clearly like setting traps for the ghosts. They have cameras up, they have a bunch of bells hanging from ropes, and these two men show up and they start to scatter flour all over the floor. And they've also gathered the dead and they've put them in the middle of the barn and they're tying bells to them as well. And then out on the street they put a ton of torches on both sides of the road and they light all the torches. Tomas also goes to the top of the barn and he puts a pinhole camera up there to capture images on the street overnight. They go back down into the barn room and they're sitting in an old wagon and just drinking wine while they wait for something to happen. While they're waiting, Anna asks Tomas if he was the one who actually came back from the dead, not the old man who was telling the story at the carnival. And Tomas says yes, and he shows Anna a picture of him at the war, and he tells her that the old man saw him surrounded by water and thought he might still be alive, so he pulled him out. And Anna says that's what Auntie said to her too. She thought that she might have been alive, but she was stuck, so she pulled her out by force, but then she didn't cry. So Auntie warmed her up and then she started to cry. And she says Auntie apologized for forcing her back into life because sometimes she thinks it was wrong, and Anna says she thinks it was right.
Yeah, and they're both connected by their near death experiences. And Anna has some really odd things kind of projected onto her by her community as a result of this. And now they find themselves in this really scary situation, both with the war and the pandemic and the hauntings. And that's all just kind of piling on top of each other.
Yeah, and I wonder too, because Anna has no parents. They both died. Did they say how her mom dies?
I don't think they did. I assumed it was the pandemic, but they did not say.
Well, because what could have happened was because Auntie says that she forced Anna out, that maybe her mom died as a result of childbirth too. So that could be one of the reasons that she was like, I probably shouldn't have brought you into this world or whatever. Kind of cheated death and one life for another kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, it could be.
Yeah. So while they're having this conversation, outside there's these two little boys that step outside of a house, and the one who's named Lassica, he puts on his bag mask and the other boy tells him to run. Lassica picks up this rope and he starts to follow it through the town, and as Lassica's walking, the rope shakes and something rips his hood off, and then all the torches on the street go out and Anna and Tomas hear footsteps on the roof. The whole building that they're in seems to rattle and shudder, and Tomas looks at the dead bodies and everything is still for a second, and then all of the bells around the bodies start ringing and Anna says, "They're here."
The director 100% saw Poltergeist as a young man.
That was my first thought too when I saw this movie. Also, the chair moving when he's talking to Marcia, that could be Poltergeist too. Actually, also, speaking of Poltergeist, when Marcia and Tomas are sitting at the table, it's exactly like the scene from Poltergeist where the paranormal investigator is sitting at the family's table and she's like, well, we're not sure. We haven't confirmed that there's ghosts here. And the chair moves across the floor. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I thought it was the tea kettle or something. But yes, I know what you're talking about. It was like the ghosts were making a point.
Well, maybe it was a tea kettle and I'm getting it confused with the chair. But anyway, they're very similar. Very similar. This guy definitely saw a poltergeist. The boy outside continues to follow the ropes along, but as he's following them, one is like super slack on the ground. So he tries to pull it and then it gets yanked out of his hands into the darkness and the boy screams and runs away. Back inside the barn, there's shadows moving everywhere. Bells are ringing, lights are flickering. The camera goes off like multiple times. Back outside, an old woman leaves her house and she sees Lassica just standing there awkwardly with his head down in the dark. She approaches him with a lantern and the ghosts start to drag the boy away down the street, and the old woman's trying to grab him and rescue him, but the ghosts grab her leg so she can't move. The boy gets dragged down to the church and the ghosts start slamming his body against the church doors.
Yeah, speaking of poltergeists, they're just getting poltergeisted all over the place.
For real, I've never seen such violent poltergeist before. Back in the barn, Anna and Tomas see a shadow run under the wagon that they're sitting in, and Tomas immediately jumps out of the wagon and starts to look for it, and something pushes Anna onto the dead bodies out of the wagon, and she lands right next to the body of the priest, and then she rolls over it, and the priest looks at Anna and kind of sits up and gasps at her while Tomas is being dragged across a barn.
This scene with the priest waking up is so freaky because he already looks like a vampire.
The priest is definitely, he's a good corpse for sure. He's freaky. Outside, Lassica continues to get slammed against the church doors until the ghosts seem to finally give up, and then they just like kind of roll him over nonchalantly and let him hang out on the side of the church for a second, and then they start to drag him down the road again, and the old lady's chasing after him. And then all of a sudden, the torchlight outside comes back on, and then Anna and Tomas leave the barn. Tomas notices that there's no footprints on the snow-covered roof or around the barn in the snow, and he tells Anna to go wait outside while he goes inside to grab the cameras. And when he goes back inside, we get one of my favorite shots. All of the bodies are now standing and posed in various positions in the middle of the barn. So some are sitting on nothing, kind of hanging in the air. Some are looking like they're dancing. The priest looks like he's praying. One looks like they're kind of like falling out of the sky. And I just paused the movie here for a second and stared at this because I would hang a poster of this on my wall. It's really kind of cool.
Hold this picture in your mind for later when we talk about the artwork that is behind some of the cinematography for this film. I also love this visual. It looks at the exact same time somehow like a freeze frame from a beautiful ballet, and also like they're about to do the corpse version of the Harlem Shake. You have this priest looking like he's mid-blessing, and you have a couple dancing. But weirdly, there's a soldier who looks like he's getting gunned down, and then the others are also posed in very beautiful and strange ways. And then, did you notice who is sitting in the very front of this tableau?
I did not immediately, but I did. It's Anna, right? She's sitting there on the floor.
Right. So what's happening there?
I have no idea. I hope you'll tell me.
I have an idea, but we'll get to it.
Perfect. In this moment, Tomas has some very serious brass balls, and instead of running out of the barn, he walks into the barn more, and he's looking at these bodies, and as he's inspecting them more, he notices that the little boy and Clara are kind of posed the same way as when he was taking their pictures, and it seems like they're all posed in the way that he photographed them.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And I also think that this entire time, they've just been desperately trying to communicate with people. And so now they're trying to communicate with him in whatever language they think he might understand, whether that's the language of the PTSD from the, all the trench warfare that he survived, or it's the language of the poses that he's using with his photography.
That's interesting. I like that. Outside, a figure starts to approach Anna from the roof of the barn. And so there's real Anna outside and then ghost Anna inside, and ghost Anna stands up and she screams and she starts to sprint at Tomas while the real Anna enters the barn from behind him, and then all the dead bodies fall to the ground. Anna tells the ghost that she wants to help, but Tomas says the spirits are gone, and then he grabs a camera and tells Anna to go get some rest, which I think is the wildest moment of this entire movie. Like, yeah, right, I would literally never sleep if I lived in this place, or if I did, it would be during the day, but we learn the ghosts can come then too. The next morning, Tomas goes to Marcia's and says he wants a bath, and Marcia awkwardly watches him from the window in the door while he washes off.
Yeah, she's got a full eyeful of his glutes, and she has an expression like she's got a bad case of wandering womb.
That's so true. I didn't even think about that. But we don't excuse a peeping Tom, because if it was a dude, I'd be creeped out.
Oh, no. Very true. Very true. It's completely inappropriate.
Yes. Back to the paranormal investigation, Tomas and Anna are now in a room and they're listening to the recording that they took from the night in the barn, and they can't make much sense of the noise that's happening. Anna continues to listen to this while Tomas goes to develop the photos. While he's in there, Anna touches the recording and she slows it down, and as she slows it down, she's able to hear voices when it's going slower, but she can't make out what they're saying. Tomas comes out from the dark room to look at the pictures, and there's one of Anna like floating in the air and one of Tomas being dragged. And there's also a picture of the two men that were helping them, and there's ghosts surrounding just the one of the two. And Tomas asks what happened to that man's forehead, and Anna says he fell through the ice and they pulled him out of the ice with a ladder. They look at another picture and they see this black streak running down the road, but they don't know what it is. And I think in this moment it's the path that the boy was being dragged. And they listen to the voices on the recording, and it sounds like the voices are saying, "Tomas, take me to the grave," over and over. And it's really creepy. It's like in a weird devil voice.
Yeah, it's I was attempting to do an impression of that with my creepy Santa Claus joke earlier, because it is very creepy the way they sound.
Yes. Well, hey, you creeped me out, so mission accomplished. I don't know that it's your voice needed to be, I don't know, a little more demonic, but you were close. You were close.
I'll do better next time.
Perfect. You better. Anyway, while they're looking at all of this stuff, there's banging on the door, and then Anna begins to throw this like impromptu town hall because all of the town folks are outside the house. She tells them that Tomas took all the pictures of the ghosts in town and recorded their voices too. She says there's more than just the dead from the town and that Tomas will find out what they want. They go to investigate the black streak in the photo and they notice it leads to Anna's house. And when they get there, Anna's auntie is sitting in the doorway looking suspicious as fuck. And Tomas notices that there's a blood streak on the door. He turns the photo upside down and they start to follow the path from Anna's house backwards. And they see that the streak leads to another house, and they go to this house and they knock on the door, but there's no answer, so they let themselves in. And when they go inside, there's water rushing down the walls, and they turn the corner and they find a family of 4 sitting around a table, and they're all very dead. Their faces are all smashed up with varying degrees of scratches, and then on Lassika's face, it looks like some of his face has been literally ripped off to the point where like you can see some of his teeth exposed.
Yeah, and not many of the corpses up to this point have had significant violence on their bodies. So to suddenly have like a couple of zombie corpses is definitely a change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first violence we see is with Tibor, and then it goes to Clary in the chimney. So it's definitely escalating. Anna comes inside and there's another woman too, and they scream while more villagers rush into the house. And people start yelling at Tomas saying he's made the spirits angry. They run outside wailing and screaming, and all of a sudden Imre starts getting dragged down the street. But it's kind of funny because he's being dragged very slowly, and it's like start, stop, start, stop. And the entire town's following him, and they're screaming, and they're kind of like grabbing for his hands, but not really. And then he gets tugged away. And he gets dragged into Anna's house, and Auntie's sitting outside. And once he gets dragged past Auntie, she all of a sudden starts convulsing and like jumping up and down in her chair and moving her arms really violently. And then Imre's dragged to the ceiling and he's banged against it over and over and over. And eventually he goes all the way through the ceiling and comes back out a few times before he's sucked completely in. And then the windows begin to be covered in ice. And from this point forward, without a doubt, is the most chaotic last 20 minutes of a movie I have ever seen. Like there's not a second to breathe from this point until the end of the movie. I have never seen anything like it. And Eleanor, I think you picked this movie just to hear me struggle trying to describe what happens in the last 20 minutes because it is insane.
This movie is very chaotic, and you are very brave for being in charge of the plot for this one. But the special effects here are really neat. It's just a blend of CGI and wire work, but it's really well done. And like you said, chaotic, and the pacing just doesn't stop.
I do want to say, too, when I was watching this, the listeners don't know this, but you had texted me right before I started this movie, and you were like, oh, yeah, I've seen this one like 10 times. It's one of the ones I often fall asleep to because it's dubbed and soothing. And I'm watching the absolute most wild chaos of any horror movie I've ever seen unfold. And I'm like, I know you're nuts, but it's sunk in for me at this moment how bad shit crazy you are.
Thank you. Thank you. I
You're
appreciate that. But no, it is. It's crazy to watch the first few times, but after a while, you're just like, oh yeah, this part, so nice. And I don't know. This movie is beautiful. It's beautifully filmed. Like, the cinematography is very pretty and just, it's art. I don't know. It's art, and I like it.
I was going to say, I will say there's moments where I was like, okay, I get it. It's art. It's pretty. Like, it's well done. I understand why you fall asleep to it. And calling you crazy means I love you. And this is why I love you.
Aw, and I love you.
Aw.
Yeah, let me know what your therapist says this means about me.
Oh my gosh, I have to start taking notes. So, okay, back to the movie. The entire town runs outside, and this crowd starts walking down the street with this giant wooden cross, and the guy who's carrying it is basically saying, "Deliver us from evil," in different ways over and over. And while this is happening, the church begins to like crack and break, and the chimney forms into this strange shape, and a dark cloud of smoke circles over top of it. And then the man holding the cross is dragged into the air, and it seems like he's either strangled or possessed or a little bit of both, and then he falls to the ground dead.
Yeah, it's more utter chaos, but honestly, this scene is so fun. Like, first of all, he's trying the religious thing and waving a cross around. And so the ghosts are like, well, what if we break your church to show you that this won't work? And then he doesn't listen. So they're like, okay, time to break you, which I found really funny. But also the fact that this is happening in broad daylight and it's happening to so many people and everyone's just running around and screaming and they all somehow look like they're on shrooms and on fire and doing aerial gymnastics. It's just so chaotic.
That's the whole last 20 minutes of this movie. Just fire aerial gymnastics. It's insane. So everyone's screaming, and Auntie's wheeling down the alley, being pulled or pushed by the ghost, and random villagers start to get dragged into the air while everyone screams and tries to pull them down. Auntie comes closer and she stands up and she starts to walk and scream, and she tackles Tomas and pins him to the ground while saying, "Tomas, take me to the grave," in the weird demon voice over and over. And then she passes out and Anna pulls her off of him.
She's like, I've been in this wheelchair to save my strength for this moment.
That's a great Auntie impression. And can I just pause here to say that they did some great casting for Auntie because she is so freaking creepy. It's very well done.
Yeah, and like she's almost a corpse, and all the corpses are fantastic in this movie. So it was like a very good choice.
Yes. And while all of this is happening, the now very dead Lassica starts to walk down the road towards the church, but there's so much chaos happening that nobody notices that this little zombie boy is walking towards them. And people are being violently thrown in the air, and Tomas yells at everyone to get into the church. And so this entire village crams into this teeny tiny little church. And then as they shut the door, the whole sky seems to blacken with the shadowy smoke of the ghost as the little boy walks towards the church grunting. Tomas sees the boy, and the boy is lifted into the air, and then he points at Tomas and says, "Now you are going to join us. You will give up the ghost," until he falls to the ground dead. The villagers then close the door, and everyone takes like a quick second to catch their breath. But as this is happening, Tomas looks around for Anna, but he doesn't see her, and he hears rattling on the door. So he goes to open it, and the townspeople wisely hold him back, and they're like, "No, don't you dare open that door." But the door opens on its own, and we see Anna standing there.
And if you look, the snow has started to fall, but now it's falling backward, and we see the snow going back up into the sky. And I know this type of thing, like the reverse shot, is just like a little bit overdone in some places, but I really liked it here. I thought it was really cool looking.
It was, like you said, everything in this movie is kind of pretty creepy, but pretty. The doors shut again, and Tomas starts to fight everyone off of him to go outside. And he does get out, and when he is out there, Anna's gone, and Auntie's wheelchair is there, but it's empty. So he goes to Auntie's house, and he sees Auntie laying on this like weird upright bed thing, and it almost appears to be like coming out of a wardrobe, and it's surrounded by these candles that are all sideways and janky.
Yeah, I think ghosts really just love to stack furniture. I'll also say, if you look at actual post-mortem photography, a lot of it features people in coffins, and they're kind of propped up in this weird way, like kind of angled so that you can see the person. And a lot of times family members and loved ones will pose around that person. So I think the kind of weird angle that her bed is at, I think that's a nod to that practice.
It totally looks like a propped coffin now that you say it. Spot on, for sure. Back at the church, Marcia and the two boys, who have been kind of helping her throughout the movie, also come out of the church and they start to look for Tomas and Anna to help them. Tomas opens the door to the barn outside Auntie's house and he sees all the bodies laying there and Anna's floating over top of them and she kind of looks peaceful, like her hair's blowing in the wind, but it's definitely like ghostly and otherworldly. And Tomas watches while Marcia runs towards him saying Auntie's about to die. So Tomas stops her and says, well, he needs to get Anna back. And just at that moment, Anna starts being dragged out of the barn by the ghost. Tomas and Marcia, they try to grab her a little bit, but they can't stop her. So they kind of just walk with her while she's being dragged and have a conversation. And Tomas says that Auntie needs to die because she's going to serve as the anchor that pulls all the spirits to the afterlife with her. So they need to gather all the dead to Auntie's house so that the spirits will follow, which is also kind of poltergeist-esque, where the one like living force pulls all the spirits to the gates. Definitely some poltergeist vibes here. Anna gets dragged into the house with Auntie and she's like floating over the bed towards her, and Tomas runs outside and he starts telling everyone to grab the dead and bring them into the house.
It's so funny, too, because they're all just like, we have gone back and forth between hating this man and blaming him for everything and listening to his plans. But you know what? Right now, a plan is a plan. Let's do it, everyone. And they just like start stacking bodies.
There's definitely some heavy crowd mentality with this village. The two boys start to drag the bodies into the house, but the whole house starts to shake, and Tomas tells them to leave and just not worry about bringing the rest of the bodies in.
And at this point, the auntie is just wildly thrashing about. Like, she's still technically alive, but, clearly on her way out. And everyone is screaming, and there are dead people stacked around her feet, and she's already on this weird corpse bed. Like, what a way to torture somebody who's already dying.
It's funny because I don't know. Well, I guess we'll talk about this at the end, but I saw Auntie as like almost the one who was like doing this or was like possessed and evil. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know anything that's going on in this movie. It's all very confusing.
It is.
As all of this is happening, Anna screams for Tomas to get her out of there. Well, Auntie screams, Tomas, don't leave us alone. And then she lets out this like crazy demon roar. And all of a sudden this wild dark music starts to play and the house starts to sink into the ground. Just like I said, his camera sunk into the mud at the very beginning of the movie. And the village just watches as it slowly sinks all the way down. Marcia peeks into a window and she tells Tomas to give her Anna. So Tomas does shove Anna out of the window, but the rest of the house goes down before he can get out too. All of a sudden, water begins to leak from the walls, and then a random dude outside throws a torch on top of the house, setting it on fire, and then just walks away. And the house on the inside begins to crack, and it kind of looks like ice cracking, and then water starts come flooding through. One of the dead bodies outside also catches fire, and then inside the house, Tomas screams. And as he screams, Clarice's body, who's outside, violently sits up and it screams too. And speaking of chaos now, all the dead bodies kind of pop up. Most of them are on fire. The priest is on fire and he starts to like violently run into people's houses and catch them on fire. And so it's this wild scene of the entire village being lit on fire by fire zombies while houses like blow up like they're being struck by bombs, and it's crazy.
It is. I think it might be impossible to do this justice in an audio format. It truly is exploding fiery aerial gymnastics.
Yes, and I assume most people have not seen this movie. If you've made it this far in the episode, just go watch the movie. It's pretty nuts.
Oh yeah, definitely watch this movie. Everyone should watch this movie. It's an incredible piece of film.
Yes. Tomas is in the house just like taking everything in, and we kind of see Auntie creepily crawl onto the floor behind him out of the bed. And the house completely fills up with water at this point, and Tomas begins to panic. He goes underwater with all the floating bodies, and then in the corner of the room, we see Auntie kind of creep out from behind a wardrobe, and then we get a jump scare where she screams underwater and grabs Tomas. Tomas freaks out, and he surfaces up for some air, and then we get this kind of faraway shot where Tomas is above the water, but Auntie's swimming towards him in the weirdest swimming walking motion I've ever seen in my life. It's kind of well shot. And then she pulls Tomas back underwater and she says, "You will take up a cross." And then we see him slowly drown.
Yeah, it's It's wild because the actors in this film have to do aerial gymnastics, be on fire, and also do underwater shots. It's kind of amazing that they did all of this in one movie. But I love that the auntie, now that she's like dying or whatever, she's out here doing underwater MMA. Like, it's mixed mortal arts.
It does kind of look like that though, like the way I don't know, it's well done. However that actress managed to do it, bravo. Tomas seemingly dies in this moment, and then he arrives in this tall gray building with windows, but there's nothing but black behind the windows, and this building's like really old and just faded gray plain.
And he just blinks into the house. Like, it's not a fade in. He doesn't kind of like wake up and come to. It's just poof, he's there.
Yes, it's very much poof. And after he arrives, like on the right side of this room is a white door and there's light coming out of it. So he walks towards the light and first he sees Emery's sister's body posed the way he posed her for the photo. And then Tibor's there in a chair with his neck all bent backwards. He then finds the priest's corpse in a coffin with his mouth open and it looks exactly like Nosferatu. And as he walks past the priest's head like turns and follows him.
It is exactly like Nosferatu. That was my thought too. And the head turn is really, really creepy. I think, speaking to my weirdness, that this entire scene that takes place in this like in-between world with the bombed out building and the gray house, whatever it is, I think the entire thing is really gorgeous. It might be the prettiest shots in the whole movie, with the exception of the corpse Harlem Shake pose from earlier.
Yeah, I do. This is definitely super pretty. I agree. I guess a giant gray Gothic mansion probably speaks to our souls.
Yeah, this is not a mystery why we like it.
No. Back outside of Purgatory in the real world, Marcia decides to do something and she grabs a rope and begins to thread it through a tree. And then she climbs the ladder towards the roof of the house that's now completely underground and goes down the chimney to rescue Tomas. Back in Purgatory, or wherever it is that Tomas is, he's walking through the house and he's just coming across all of the dead bodies from town in varying positions. And as he's doing this, we see one of the shadow people kind of following him. Back outside, Marcia dives into the water and she does find Tomas and she ties him to the rope and begins to pull him out. Back in the dream world, Tomas turns a corner and we see Auntie kind of like violently and jarringly come out and she runs screaming at him. And then the other bodies come to life and walk towards him and then follow him as the village outside starts to become attacked by the shadow people.
Do you think that the dead here are trying to guide him out of this situation or bring him with them?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that because all of the dead follow him. So I don't know that they're doing anything because they're all behind him in this shot.
I read it as they were marching him towards something, like they were converging around him to push him towards something, whether that something is an escape or at the end.
Yeah, and maybe they don't even know. Maybe they're just like, well, there's a force here and you're going towards it.
Like we said earlier, a plan is a plan.
A plan is a plan. Marcia does manage to get Tomas's body out of the house, but he isn't breathing, so they lay him on the ground while Anna starts to scream and hit him and tell him to wake up. And he doesn't move, and the townspeople start to cry. Back in Purgatory, Tomas finds Anna's body, and it's floating in the air again. And Tomas kind of does this thing where he bends over backwards and then floats under Anna, and then their bodies are lifted into the air by the swirling shadow smoke.
Did you notice that the structures here, like they really look like bombed out buildings, right? Like places he might have saw in the war.
Oh, yeah. I did notice that it looked like they were because they go from this full mansion kind of thing to this almost like underground, like you're looking at the pillars at the bottom of a cave, but it's definitely structures. And now that you're saying they looked bombed out, like I agree. It's almost like bombed out structures mixed with a cave.
Yeah, it's got that like spalling effect that you see from shrapnel and everything. It definitely looks like some old bombed out building.
It then cuts to the vision Tomas saw when he died during the war, and he sees Anna whispering his name with him, and the fires are burning behind her. And all of a sudden, all the dead bodies start to fall to the ground. The black smoke disappears. Tomas wakes up, spitting up a bunch of water, and he's alive. It's now daytime, and the church bells are ringing. Tomas says goodbye to Marcia and leaves town with Anna. They ride a horse into the forest, and they stop at this cross with a dead frozen bull next to it, and they look down at a distant village, and Tomas asks Anna if she's ever been to that village, and Anna says not yet. It then cuts back to the village, and you hear like this screaming in the distance, and the movie ends.
Da-da-da-da! Ghostbusters!
Sure. I don't know. This whole movie is so wild.
Well, tell me, what do you think is happening in this movie? Like, if you had to summarize this whole thing, why the ghosts? Why the dancing corpses? Why did Anna and Thomas seem to connect both to the ghosts and to each other?
So like I said, I think I have a good theory on what the ghosts are doing. I think that for whatever reason, they have issues with all these people that have quote unquote cheated death and are trying to now get them to come back to the afterlife with them, but they can't get to them. So they're taking whoever they can. And I think that's happening because like there's the one boy who fell through the ice, and that's how Imre dies. He gets sucked into the ceiling, but it looks like ice is cracking when he gets pulled up there. And then there's a guy who froze to death for no apparent reason, so that's the ice as well. And then, like I already said what I think Tibor's death is, and I think that's Anna's umbilical cord, as well as the random suffocated person in the barn. And then, I don't know if you noticed, but at the very beginning of the movie, there's like this smoke on the battlefield, and it looks exactly like the smoke that the ghosts make at the end of the movie. So like when it's going above the church and when it's just like going under Anna, it's just very like that smoke is from when Thomas was supposed to die. And then the other things from when Tomas was supposed to die, all the time the water comes into play was from his death, and then all the blast wounds were from his death, and then the people getting dragged into the air are like the soldiers being blown up on the battlefield. And then, so that's what I think the ghosts are doing. I think they're just like taking the tax that is owed to them. But for the Anna Tomas connection, I don't have any idea. Like, I do think Anna is most tied to the dead because she was supposed to die so young, and like, so maybe because it happened to her in this like really important transitory moment in life that like she's more connected to the afterlife than anyone else, and that's why she's so in tune with the spirit. But like how and why they found each other and what now they're gonna do with each of these towns, I have no idea. I don't know. You tell me. Please tell me.
Well, like many horror directors, that I don't think Peter Burgundy left us a little note that says, here's everything explained perfectly. Because I think the beauty of a lot of horror films is that things are left to interpretation and you kind of project your own point of view into these movies, and it speaks to different people in different ways. And so speaking of projection, I think that the vision that Tomas had of Anna from the beginning, I think that was a projection of his will to live. So I think he had like a near-death experience where you see something. You think you see a bright light, or you hear a loved one speaking to you or something. So he survives that battlefield with the sense that he saw something perhaps miraculous. And now he's in a state where it's very easy to kind of ascribe larger meaning to it. So when he saw her in the market, I think he just projected that image onto her. Like, she kind of looks like that image that I saw. I'm now going to make this connection more meaningful than maybe it actually is. He's displaced and he's drifting, and he's probably looking for something a lot more meaningful, especially after surviving what he survived. It had to have felt like the end of the world. You have the devastation from World War I, and then the even more devastating pandemic. I know that like the whole Anna and Tomas thing can kind of take on a creepy element, but I don't think that is what the director was going for at all. And I think with the trauma and the death and the displacement of what was happening at the time, I think it probably made for some very unusual partnerships. So I don't think he has a real vision of her saving him. I think he saw something, or he thought he saw something, and he retrofitted that onto her. And I think Anna was ready for an adventure to be a weird girl with a weird mentor, given, kind of her history with the superstition surrounding her birth and death and the fact that she's now an orphan. Like, why not? Like, she's orphaned. Her relationship with her village is strained at best. She has this cloud of death and superstition, and that kind of gives her an uncanny outlook on life, and that shaped how the village, treated her. And I think it gave her a connection to these ghosts. Kind of like you alluded to, I do think that water imagery and the smoke imagery and all that stuff, this is just the ghost trying to speak to Tomas. They're trying to get someone to listen to them. He had his near-death experience in the brutal, soggy trenches of World War I. He's got PTSD from the war and nearly dying, and, lots of trauma from the actual hellscape that is trench warfare. And these ghosts are just using that to get his attention, really from the second he gets to the village. And we saw his camera nearly sink into the grass, and then that dog fighting a ghost in front of him. Like, immediately they are trying to speak, to him in a language that he will understand. I think that the reason you see images that look like Anna as a ghost, I think that's the ghosts trying to project an image towards Tomas, because they know, like, Tomas and Anna have a connection, and the ghosts sense that, and they want to use her image to get Tomas to help them by putting them to rest. So those visions that he has of her in danger when he's having those dreams, the image, in the barn where she appears as a ghost in front of those corpses, I think that's them just all it is they are trying to get his attention. And I think this whole movie is just more interesting to think of in terms of the experience of Anna and Tomas and the absolute insanity of the world that they existed in, which was the aftermath of World War I and the pandemic.
Okay. I mean, I definitely think I for sure get the PTSD elements from this movie. That makes total sense. I also think it is like a larger narrative of how weird the world must have felt and how surrounded in death the world must have felt when the Spanish flu and the war were claiming all of these lives, and probably seemingly in ways that didn't make any sense to people, or like, why would you take this little girl and not me, and things like that we see at the very beginning. So this movie took those feelings and amplified them into this like dark force that goes into these towns and murders all these people. It's like a who should have lived, who should have died, why are you alive, why aren't you kind of thing. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, and I think there is a lot of psychology that goes into some of the choices that were made here.
So the only thing that still bothers me is, so now Anna and Tomas are going to the next village that was screaming. I guess when I was watching this, in my mind, somehow they were responsible for the ghosts being there. But when you say everything you just said, it's just more like they're connected to the ghosts and can see and hear and feel them. So now they're just going to go to villages and liberate them from the ghosts. Is that what you get?
Yeah, I think so. I think you could probably maybe make an argument that Anna and Tomas thinking that everything that was happening was their fault was kind of a little bit of the survivor's guilt, right? Like, they're still there and bad things are happening and they seem to be sensitive to those, whatever the ghosts are trying to get across. So why not blame yourself for that? Like, I can understand that thought process. But I don't think the ghosts are there because of Anna or are there because of Tomas. I think Anna and Tomas are more sensitive to seeing them because of what they experienced. And I think some of the other villagers were also more sensitive to seeing them because of their near-death experiences, but those villagers didn't react or didn't want to listen and try to understand what the ghosts were saying, and because of that, they ended up dead. I think that's kind of what happens here.
Interesting. Wild movie. Absolutely insane. But now that we have thoroughly dug into the plot, it's time to dig a little deeper. What have you unearthed for us today?
I have to begin by saying that for a movie that has a Wikipedia page that's like a paragraph, I feel like I unearthed quite a bit. So I hope you're all ready to absolutely nerd out with me in this very unique piece of cinema. We are going to dig into history. We're going to start with the context in which this movie was made. And to do that, I will talk a little bit about the history of the horror genre in Hungary and why this movie is significant in that regard, as well as some of the art that the director and cinematographer used for inspiring the look of the film. Then I'll get into the history that this movie was set in, so both World War I and the 1918 pandemic. And then finally, we are going to talk about the practice of post-mortem photography through the years and especially the Victorian era. So let's start with the context that this movie was made in. Hungary was a communist state from 1949 to 1989. Under communism in the Soviet era, art was heavily censored and controlled by the government. Art that was regarded as Western or anything not promoting the goals and ideals of communism or the state's interests were basically taboo, if not outright illegal. And horror was one of these art forms. The reasoning was horror is a Western bourgeoisie art form. It's full of escapism and superstition, and these are all antithetical to communist values, so it's out. Now, you can find some Hungarian horror films from this period, but it's accurate to say that they were very rare for decades, and they certainly were not being shown in theaters at the time. And that sort of thing can definitely have long-lasting effects on what kind of art a culture produces.
Okay, so there are other Hungarian horror films. Are there any that no mainstream ones, like you said?
No, certainly not in the way that Post Mortem kind of made its mark. And I'll talk about that in a minute too.
Interesting. Yeah, that would suck. I would definitely be in the underground arts community in Soviet era Hungary.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Now, the director, Peter Burgundy, said that even though these films basically didn't exist in his country growing up, in the 80s, he managed to get his hands on some Super 8 copies of these evil, Western, escapist, bourgeoisie horror films, and he fell in love. So much so that when he studied as a psychologist in school, he says he did his thesis on symbolism in horror films and the characteristics of the lovers of horror films. I could not find his thesis, but I found his email address. So I wrote to him and I asked for a copy. Did he write me back? No, he did not. But
No.
I know. But it's summer in Europe, so if he's not on vacation, he's probably, busy filming. But listeners, if any of you can somehow manage to get me an English copy of Peter Burgundy's psychology thesis on horror symbolism and horror lovers, I'll be so forever grateful. So, like I said, to even start making a major horror film in Hungary is already a feat in and of itself. This movie ended up being Hungary's official submission to the 2022 Oscars. It did not get a nomination, but it did win a ton of other awards. So when you say, were there any as mainstream as this? No. This is a huge deal of a movie for a horror movie in Hungary.
This is so cool. Also, when you said Super 8s, I was like, sinister. But I will find Peter Burgundy on the socials and I will make him write us back.
I don't want to, let's not threaten him. The man makes...
I'm joking.
The man makes a pretty good horror movie. Imagine, I'm sure he could torment us.
That's true. How about this? Listeners, when this airs, everyone needs to go watch this movie so that it gets this huge spike in views so that this man could be like, what's happening? Then he'll find our podcast and email us back.
Horror Sandbox is happening, Peter Burgundy. Do you hear that?
And we need your thesis because it's my dream thesis. I wish I could have done that in college.
Oh, I know. Now, in college, Charlie, I know you studied lots of art. Tell me what you thought about the visuals of this film, like the style and the cinematography.
I really did love it. Like we said, there was some very artistic moments throughout this movie, and I like the era it was filmed in too, and because the photographer is an artist himself, and I don't know, I really liked the style. It was unique. It was simple and yet creepy. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful. And for the inspiration for some of the look of this film, the director said he wanted to capture some of the same style as some of the Hungarian realist paintings from the end of the 19th century. So early on in the production process, he compiled a bunch of famous Hungarian pieces, and he kind of set the tone for what, for the kind of look he was going for. In an interview that I watched from a website called Cinema Without Borders, he didn't say exactly which pieces, and I decided not to bother him with another email. But I do think I found the likely candidates for which ones, so I brought them to you today to look at, and we will, of course, post these. The first one is called The Condemned Cell 1. It's by Miha Munkachi, and it's from 1870. So tell me what you think of this one.
Well, first, I want to say that you clearly do love me because I am so excited for these pictures. I love my art history. I love art.
I do love bringing you, like a cat brings a little dead rat to one of its favorite people. I just love bringing you these things that I find.
I do. It's amazing. I love it so much. So this painting is this man in this cell sitting at a table with a white tablecloth and two candles on it. And there's a crowd of people looking at him and a soldier guarding him. And then there's like this little girl next to him.
Yeah, it reminds me kind of the tableau a little bit, what I call the corpse Harlem Shake, where you have all these people kind of caught in the middle of movement, but they're kind of frozen there. And the lighting, I think, definitely reminds me of those scenes in the barn with the corpses. And I also think the lighting that is in this, where you have an image that is at once very dark and very light. Like there's light that's illuminating the faces of the characters involved, but there's some very dark and gloomy stuff happening too.
Yeah, the lighting like this was a big part of the realist painting movement. So the director did do a really good job of capturing like the lighting techniques that these artists used in these realist paintings and brought it to cinema somehow, and it's really neat.
Yeah, and I know we talked a little bit about some of the darkest things in this movie happening in broad daylight. That kind of reminds me of this too.
Yeah, that's very true.
Okay, so let's go to the next painting. It's by the exact same artist. This one is called The Yawning Apprentice, and it's from 1869.
Yeah, so this one is way more simple. It's just a portrait of a man or young boy, and his head's leaned back and his mouth is wide open, and his eyes are closed and his mouth is wide open in a yawn formation, and his neck is almost kind of bent. And I guess probably why you picked this one is it's kind of similar to some of the ways that the bodies were posed during the
Yes,
movie.
that's exactly why.
Yeah.
And also that I know he's yawning in this photo, but you could imagine this like the scream of a dead person.
Yeah, it definitely looks like one of the bodies that was posed throughout this movie.
Okay, and then the next two are by the artist Tevidar Zebleny, and this first one is called The Poor Woman's Home, and it's from 1895.
So this one is a elderly woman she's wearing this long blue dress and she's sitting at the foot of a bed eating out of a large bowl. The house it's got the white walls and like a wooden door and the wooden floors. So the house looks just like the houses that were in this movie. There's some plants in the windows, so it's got that lighting element that we talked about where it's both light and dark at the same time. So yeah, I mean, definitely like the style of the house is relevant here. The lighting's relevant here. There's like some tools hanging on the walls and things like that. It looks a lot like the movie.
Yeah, and she could stand up and open that door and Tomas is there. That's how much this looks like it belongs in the set.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's very much like that. It's cool.
All right, and so the last one I'll show you is from the same artist, and this one is called In the Church, and it's from 1889.
So this one, it's inside of a church. It's just two women. One is very old. The other one's much younger. They're sitting on a church pew. The one's holding a little, probably like a prayer book. And then I think in the background is art that you would typically find in a church, like of a saint or something, some murals in the background. They're just wearing like those long dresses, like that old kind of garb, the traditional garb.
Yeah, and we have that same realist lighting technique that certainly, I think at least, comes across very well in the movie.
Yes, the lighting is very well done. He did a good job. If this was the vibe he was going for, he definitely hit the nail on the head with it. I love it. It's very cool. Good job with the paintings.
Yeah, and I don't have an educational background in art or art history, but I listened to the man when he said I wanted to find Hungarian realist paintings from the 19th century and use them to inspire the visual tones of the film. And then I found a fantastic exhibit from a museum in Hungary, and I just looked until I saw Post Mortem, and that's what I came up with. That link, of course, will also be on our show notes. So let's talk about the history of where and when this film was set. The director's choice to set a horror film about ghosts in post-World War Hungary was deliberate. In that same interview that I mentioned earlier, he said that post-World War Hungary was a particularly traumatic time in Hungary's history and is still viewed that way by many today. Hungary, of course, had been part of the Austria-Hungary Empire and one of the central powers of World War I. When the war ended, one of the consequences was something called the Treaty of Trianon, which resulted in Hungary losing 2/3 of its territory. And the conditions of that treaty had other really severe provisions other than just the loss of territory. For example, if you were Hungarian and lived outside of the new borders, you lost your citizenship within a year. So you were Hungarian, you would not be in 1 year, and now you're in a different country. And so even without the loss of life from both the war and the pandemic, you had this other kind of loss piled onto it. This is a Hungarian horror film about ghosts set in a time that still in some ways haunts Hungary today.
Yeah, I definitely that's crazy. And it's funny. You, speaking of college, are dragging me straight back into it. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but my major in college was German and Spanish. So I certainly studied quite a bit about the Austrian-Hungary Empire. Gosh, yeah, it's a good, I didn't even think about that part of the story, but it definitely adds another layer to the trauma and the ghosts and everything that these people were experiencing.
It does, and in my opinion, understanding this part of the history of what was happening in that region at the time kind of makes it make a lot more sense that a character or person might choose to just, team up with a weird little girl or a weird photographer and just go travel the lands. Like, because everything has been turned upside down. So their relationship, I think, starts to make more sense when you understand that piece.
I think too that loss of identity probably comes into play here, and the not knowing where to go, and people just being like, well, there's nothing left here, there's nothing to be afraid of, I'm just kind of here, like living until I die too. Like that whole feeling of just emptiness and loss of identity and self, it probably tied into this as well.
Yeah, I think so too. There's some unspeakable levels of, identity and trauma and just all that other stuff. It's insane. It's insane what happened. So let's talk a little bit about that war and the pandemic. The war casualties in Austria-Hungary were between 1.7 and 2 million. For comparison, the United States lost about 117,000 during World War I. The total death toll of World War I is between 15 and 22 million dead. And that is just dead. That doesn't even count the wounded. So this is truly an unfathomable amount of loss. It was a very cruel and brutal war, as all wars are, but the trench warfare conditions and the introduction of new weaponry that literally shredded people into pieces in ways that had not been seen before and at scale, this was very new and very awful. I don't think we can fully grasp it, and I can't imagine trying to grasp it at the time.
No, I didn't realize... I didn't realize how many that they lost in particular. That's crazy. And you know what else? The Austrian-Hungary empire, they were the reigning power in Europe for quite a few decades, maybe even centuries before this collapse happened. So it's crazy to go from being the ruling central power in Europe to just watching everything get taken away and all of your citizens die and all of your young men go to war and just not come back. That whiplash must be insane to have lived through. I couldn't even imagine it.
Right, exactly. And it already felt like the end of the world. And then came the pandemic of 1918. This was also known as the Spanish influenza. And because it was called that, a lot of people think it must have originated in Spain, and that's not exactly true. Basically, because there was a war going on, different countries' governments were being very guarded. They were censoring a lot of information, essentially. They suppressed news about the flu. You couldn't talk about it. So reports and news were suppressed. And in the middle of all this, the country of Spain was neutral. So their reporters and their government was able to write about this, and it was not being suppressed. So because the reports were coming from Spain, people started calling it Spanish influenza. Can you imagine a government suppressing or downplaying pandemic information? Who would have thought?
Who would have thunk? This hits way too close to home. I will say, if our listeners, because you just reminded me of something that I listened to a while back, and if our listeners really want to dig into the Spanish flu pandemic and all of that and why it happened, how it happened, who it affected, there is a podcast. Have you ever heard of This Podcast Will Kill You?
You are reading my mind, because that's literally the podcast I was about to shout out.
Yes, they're so good. If people are interested in this or anything pandemic, anything disease, This Podcast Will Kill You is a great podcast. It's really interesting. I listened to it and I was like, oh, I want to go study disease now. And I don't even know the first thing about science, biology, any of it. But it's really cool. It's really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Because we are not going to turn this into a disease podcast. So if you want that, definitely go listen to This Podcast Will Kill You. And I think it was their first episode that they did about this pandemic. Now, in Hungary at the time, a pro-government paper actually claimed that there was no link between the virus and the pneumonia deaths. And many governments, when they weren't just suppressing the news altogether, they were busy blaming other governments for the outbreaks. We don't actually know where the pandemic started. We have lots of theories. Some of the big ones include a possible outbreak that started in China in late 1917, the trenches in Europe, and also a small town near a big army camp in Kansas. What we do know about this disease is that it was brutal. So I will briefly go over how severe this thing was. It was incredibly infectious, and the deployment of literally millions of soldiers across practically the entire planet made this truly a perfect storm. The fact that this came near the end of the war, when huge, massive crowds and parties and parades would just break out, also helped this thing spread. It could kill you within 24 to 48 hours after symptoms set in. There are countless stories of people waking up with a mild cough, going to work or going about their day, and then turning blue and dropping dead hours later. People were coughing up foaming blood and launching blood across the room as they coughed. Sometimes blood would come out of their eyes or nose. The doctors who examined some of these lungs of the victims, they said they looked like they'd been subjected to poison gas. And there are stories of entire areas running out of coffins and small villages going from a population of 80 to a population of 8.
Gosh, yeah, I forgot about the bit about how quickly it could kill you. That's so scary. The one other thing I remember about it, and I think I mentioned it earlier in the episode, was that it targeted this population where the flu typically targets either babies or the elderly. This one, it was taking out people who were healthy, like young men who normally just get sick and go on with their day, minus having the man flu. And so it was really alarming, and it was already hitting this specific subset of people that were dying in the war or had died in the war. So it was really difficult and scary.
Yes, very difficult, very scary. And I read somewhere that they think the reason that people who are typically young and healthy enough to survive a normal flu didn't survive this one because they didn't have immunity to influenza in general. There had been some sort of earlier outbreaks that were a little bit more mild in nature that affected the generation prior. So the older folks actually had a little bit of immunity to it, and these young folks simply did not.
Yeah, that's nuts. Ugh, so creepy.
It was creepy. It was very bad. They think about 50 million people died of this across the world. 50 million. Just as a reminder, everyone who died in World War I is around 22 million. And then influenza comes, and it's about 50 million people. Just in Europe, about 20 million people died. In the US, it was nearly 700,000. So this was much more devastating than the entire death toll of World War I. And I could keep going on all of this. There's so much you can dive into with this. There's tons of resources out there if you want to dive further into this horror, some of which will be linked on the show notes on our website. So go check that out if you want to learn more and be terrified of actual horrors. Now, with that mountain of death avalanching on the survivors across the globe, a peculiar practice actually started to die out, and that practice was post-mortem photography. People have been immortalizing their loved ones forever, whether it's in statues or in paintings or photography. Now, with the invention of the camera, post-mortem or memorial photography became a common practice around the late 1830s. Even though photography was becoming more accessible, this was sometimes the only photo that a person ever had of their loved ones. So you can understand the desire to preserve that memory of someone that you loved, especially at a time when funerals and wakes were things that happened inside your home. Like families took care of this.
I think postmortem photos make total sense to me. Is it something I would have done personally? I'm not sure, but I mean, the idea of losing someone forever, and there was probably everyone was probably like, oh man, when we get enough money, we'll go get our picture taken so that we have it, or when we get older. But then all of these people suddenly started dying, and they were like, oh, we never got that picture taken. And it's like, well, you can still memorialize your loved one before you bury them by taking a photo. And it makes sense to me. If you get one photo of a person, you're going to want it, regardless of their state of being, I suppose.
Exactly. And maybe it's a tradition in your family that everybody gets a wedding photo because it's something you could save up for and plan for and what have you. And then your loved one dies before then. I do think it makes sense. After World War I and the pandemic, this explosion of death everywhere probably made it feel a lot less urgent to do these kinds of photos. And the increase in how much death was simply everywhere was changing the mourning customs in a bunch of different ways. So the mourning periods were reduced and there were far fewer public expressions of mourning and grieving. And along with this, the practice of post-mortem photography also decreased. Although in some regions, they still did this through even the 50s and 60s, and technically it still exists today in some ways, which I'm going to mention here in a moment.
Curious how I'm trying to think how it still exists. That's interesting. I guess it's true. Like, if so many people around you are dying, and a lot of them died overseas, away from home. So if and when you ever get those bodies, which you probably don't back then, they're not going to be in a state to get photos. Yeah, so I could see how like that decreased, and then there's only so many people are dying, and people are still, as we learned in the COVID pandemic, you're still living life. You still have to, get food, stay living, make money, so you have to quickly move on. So I could see how it changed the mourning process. It's sad. I hate it, but I can understand it.
Right. And they're also trying to not die of the pandemic themselves, right? So
you probably don't want to spend that much time around flu bodies. Yeah.
Right. Now, anytime you talk about post-mortem photography or try to looking up, especially if you're talking about the Victorian era, you're going to come across some really fun posts that claim to show pictures of dead people. And it's kind of like, my God, these Victorians were a bunch of freaks who couldn't stop taking pictures of dead people and posing them in weird ways. And there's a few pictures that will make their rounds like this. There's one that's got like 4 kids all standing up, and the post will say something like, "There's something strange about this photo. One of these children is dead. That's right, they're all standing up together as siblings, but no longer alive, all of them." Or something weird like that. But no, if you think about it for 2 seconds, you would not take a post-mortem photo of anyone standing up. You do see examples of someone's coffin propped up so that you can see the deceased, and then you see people posing around those coffins. Those are usually real. And we did kind of talk about that when we were talking about Auntie's final moments. And then remember how Tomas was using those stands to prop up the dead?
Yeah, I do. And I did not question it for a second.
No, those stands were real, and they were used in photography, but they were actually used to help the living person sit still, because you had to be very still for old photography equipment to work properly. So in order for you to not look super blurry, you had to keep so still that it actually made sense to kind of put a rack around like your head or your neck or even some limbs. You'll see a lot of these photographs from this period. People are sitting or they might be leaning on something. They're using something to keep their bodies still. So if you ever see a photo where you can see some of those braces or racks kind of holding their heads or limbs still, that is someone who was alive, because you wouldn't need to hold a dead person still. And also, if you were trying to prop up the dead weight of a stiff corpse, you would definitely need something a lot sturdier than that. So the movie gets that very wrong, mostly for artistic effect. There's an article I found from rarehistoricalphotos.com that debunks kind of some of the more common kind of internet claims about these old photos being of dead people when they're actually alive. And we're definitely going to share this.
I love this. I knew, that's funny, because I took a old school photography class back in high school where like literally I was developing film in a dark room. It was awesome. It was my favorite class ever. Well, that and ceramics. Anyway, so I knew you had to stay super, super still for those pictures, but I never for a second did I think those props were used for people who were alive, but it makes total sense because even like the slightest motion, you're going to blur that photo. That's crazy.
Yeah, it definitely does its rounds on the internet. So you can arm yourselves and try to figure out the real ones. If you want some reliable sources on actual post-mortem photography, I'm going to link 2 of them in our show notes. One of them is the William L. Clements Library at the University of Michigan. They featured an exhibition on death in early America. This was back in 2017. And their website still has a section where you can learn more about the practice. And yes, you can see photographs of actual dead people. who were dead at the time of the photograph being taken. It is very educational and slightly morbid, which I think most fans of this show will appreciate. The other source I found is the Burns Archive. This was created by a professor of medical humanities at New York University named Dr. Stanley Burns. He has been a collector of historical photos since the 1970s, and he has an extensive collection of post-mortem photographs. He and his team have advised on tons of movies and shows and documentaries, including the horror movie The Others, which we will eventually do an episode on. As part of my research for this episode, because I couldn't badger Peter Burgundy anymore, I listened to 2 lectures that Dr. Burns gave. One was for a museum and one was for a medical school. These are both linked on the Burns Archive website, which we will post to our show notes on our website. I learned some really fun things in these lectures, and there are some, I think, unintentionally hilarious bits. In one of these lectures, during the Q&A section, someone very sincerely asked Dr. Burns if he's ever been visited by the subjects of the photographs in his collection. So this woman asked if the ghosts come and haunt him. And he just without skipping a beat, he's like, no, but their living relatives come drop by all the time.
It's hilarious. I love that. It's a question I would ask, to be fair.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. My favorite moment of the entire thing that made me, I had to pause. I was laughing so hard. He's talking about a book by a fellow academic named Ernest Becker, and the book is called Denial of Death. This is a book about death and how different people and cultures react to it. And he said that one of the takeaways from this book is that if you don't want to worry about death, a good way to do this is to create something in your lifetime that lives on after you. Then he pauses for 2 seconds, flips the slide, and says, now my book. And then he proceeds to do a plug for his 1990 book called Sleeping Beauty, which is about post-mortem photography. It's deadpan. The timing was perfect. And I can't tell if he did this on purpose, but I was cackling.
That's funny, but also I love this perspective because I'm one of those people who's like, I don't know. Sometimes I get super anxious about death out of the blue. Hate it. Don't like to think about it. I'm not one of those people that's going to go calmly into the night. I'm going to be upset about it. So
you're going to go out like Auntie, just thrashing and
thrashing. So I'm going to pull a Burns here and say, well, at least I created a podcast for my legacy.
We'll make sure that data center that stores this podcast is the one that survives.
Yes, exactly.
Now, I'm going to bum us out a little bit because that was very funny. But what did not make me laugh at all was the discussion of the current practice of post-mortem photography. You already said you didn't have a guess as to where and how this might still be practiced today. There are charities that will come and do these post-mortem photos or memorial photos for families who have just had a stillbirth. There is one in particular that is mentioned in these lectures, and it's called Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. They take memorial photos of stillborn infants for families for free, and don't go to that website unless you are in the right headspace. This is amazing and important work, but it's heavy. And of course, you can understand why people would want to memorialize their stillbirth because, they want to show the world that they had this child, they existed, they were loved.
Oh, now that you say it, I've heard of that. And it's amazing the work that they do for these families that are experiencing the most difficult moments of their life. And that's so heartbreaking. You're so right. I didn't even think about that, but I remember reading about this because I don't know why. I don't know what very deep and dark rabbit hole I went down before I gave birth, but somehow I ended up here. And it's super sad, but I'm glad that there's someone out there doing it to give the families something in those really hopeless moments.
Yeah, me too. I wasn't ready for it when he started talking about this. And that was, I think it was towards the very end of the last lecture I watched. So I had to stop and I just went upstairs and my husband's staring at me. He's like, are you okay? I was like, no, you want to watch something funny?
Right? Yeah. Like, let's put something light on the TV. Yeah.
And we went,
so
we went with the lighthearted comedy, Widow's Bay, because I am who I am, Charlie. So now, have you ever seen a memorial photograph, like a modern one?
So when I was researching about the stillborn infant photos, I don't think I saw any that were like the full picture of the baby, but like some of they do a lot of the ones where you just see their little hands and things like that. I have seen some of those.
Yeah, it'll be like the hand holding the finger of the parents or whatever.
Yeah, or like wrapped in a blanket, something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have seen one in real life, and this was a funeral for an infant who died in childbirth. It was a very nice photo. I actually don't know if it was taken by a company or a charity like Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, or if it was done by family or, even hospital staff. It was very nice. I understand why they did it, but I couldn't look at it for more than 1 second. And do you remember this funeral?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I didn't go, but I did I just because I wasn't that close to the family, so I wanted to give them their space, but I did bring them some like food after it happened. But yeah, very sad.
Yeah.
I remember that event.
Yeah, this was really hard for me because I was involved with the family and they didn't know it at the time, but I was pregnant at the time. And so I'm attending, I ended up attending, yep, that was my youngest. So I was attending this funeral of a tiny little baby, and I myself was pregnant, and everything about it was really heavy. But the photo that they took, I totally understand why they would want to have that around. So I definitely see the value in this practice.
I do remember that, that event. I do remember it hitting you very hard. And I was in the headspace at that time where you had both your babies before I was ever pregnant. So I didn't understand or appreciate how much pregnancy changes your brain when this stuff is happening and how much harder it hits you when all that's going on. So that's insanely difficult the whole thing was really tragic. Super sad.
Yeah.
Glad they got a photo though.
Yeah. And, that's all very, very heavy and depressing. And you can kind of understand why it's a lot more appealing to look at kind of weird old Victorian photos because you're further removed from it and they're making funny faces because they've been holding that pose for who knows how long. And then if you see the post-mortem ones, some of them do look kind of odd, or they're certainly not something we see every day. So you can understand kind of the draw for the curious and for the morbidly curious. And if you want to see curated and real examples of post-mortem photography, those two sources that I mentioned, the Burns Archive and the William L. Clements Library at the University of Michigan, those are really good sources to view that. I would suggest maybe be careful about how you talk about them or share them because these were never intended to be blasted across the internet and gawked at, right? Like these are memorial photographs. This was something that was done out of love and grief. So, keep that in mind if you do want to learn more about the practice. And this, Charlie, is what I dug up for us on the 2020 film Post Mortem, a story built on real and fictional ghosts, real and fictional loss, and a lot of very fun corpse dancing.
Dang, this is a heavy one. I mean, the movie's heavy and chaotic. The story behind the movie is heavy and sad and a lot of death. This is some true horror right here, which I guess kind of brings us into the next part that we do where we talk about what did we dig into today. So I'm going to jump right ahead and say that this is some true profound horror on a deep level that hits on some very real and difficult topics. And yeah, what do you think? What do you think this movie is? Horror, tragedy, something else?
I think it's definitely horror. I appreciated this movie when I saw it the first time with zero context. I loved the corpse dancing. I loved how beautiful the shots were. I loved the jump scares. Some of it seemed kind of goofy to me, but I just liked it. It felt very different and also familiar. And now understanding the history and even just the context of how this horror movie even came to be in a country that simply did not do those for decades, it feels like a traditional ghost story, and it also feels like something I've never seen before. It's something else entirely. So I know this is a weird one, but I really love this movie. And it's a horror movie. It's a ghost story. It's a ghost hunter's story. Like it's so much.
Yeah. And maybe it's even a touch of memorial art in itself.
Oh,
but yeah,
sure.
it's a crazy movie. This one's wild. Never would have watched it without you. Glad you brought it into my life. Not one I'm going to fall asleep to every night.
Well, it's not every night. I don't do that every night. My husband won't let me.
That's true. That's true. He's probably like, this one again? Oh, man. But all right. Before we put down the shovels for today, do you want to tell our listeners what we'll be digging into next week?
Well, Charlie, I want to play a game. So next week, we will dig into the 2004 film Saw. That's right, the original. And we'll see if the nostalgia holds up.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm definitely interested in this one. I know this one borders on our murder, torture, porn line, but it's the original Saw, just the original. So I think it's worth doing. I think it'll be fun.
For any listener who wasn't sure what we're talking about here, our point of view is the types of horror movies that we're going to do probably won't include what we view as, torture porn or gore for the sake of gore. And Saw is kind of right on that line, but I think we'll have fun cutting into that one.
I think so too. I don't think we'll be doing the rest of the franchise, but we got to do the original. So yeah. All right. Well, that does it for us today, listeners. May the horrors persist.
And listen to your dancing corpses. Thanks for listening to Horror Sandbox. No generative AI was used in the making of this podcast. For show notes, credits, and contact info, check out our website, horrorsandbox.com. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Horror Sandbox. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/horrorsandbox. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with all the horror fans in your life.